started working on the course on the Slav, there are important positional chunks and patterns that started to emerge. Black to play in this position. Should Black exchange those queens on b3, or should we play the move queen c7, folks? Please stop the video and judge for yourself, please. That's a very typical decision in the Slav defense, but also in London and so many different openings, okay? How do you decide, folks? How do you decide? You're a great player, folks, if you found the move queen c7. That's the only move for Black that gives Black a small advantage objectively. If you take on b3, which is usually a bad policy, you not only activated that rook on the a file, but also very importantly, folks, you're giving White a very strong idea of pushing b4, b5. You see, if knight d7 comes b5 anyway, because that pawn is pinned, another very typical pattern in the London and the Slav, and there's no way for Black now to, stop White from creating a weakness on the queen side. Because if you take with the c pawn, then bishop takes b5 or even knight takes b5 is coming, and White undoubles their pawns. Later on, they will push b4, b5, and they are creating play on the queen side. So this transformation, when the pawn can very quickly go to b4, b5, is usually a bad policy for us on the queen side. That's how you can quickly understand that a trade is favoring you or the opponent. But there's more to it, folks. Here, queen c7 is a very good move. Not only that the queen starts eyeing the pawn on h2, but also the queen supports the pawn break b5 as well as b6 on the queen side. Suddenly, it's Black who is holding some of the key pawn breaks, and your queen is supporting both of these breaks. You will also play knight d7 on the next turn, which also supports those pawn breaks to activate the Black pieces, folks. Sometimes in those Slav structures, this bishop already sits on f4, and thus this allows the move queen c7. Here, since there is no bishop on this diagonal, queen c7 is very safe and solid choice for Black. How do we come to that position, folks? Let's look. It's the game between Royas and Alonso Rosell, chessable author from Spain, grandmaster with the Black pieces. Typical mainline Slav, e3 Slav in this case. White has several choices in this position. Let's look at the line e3. They simply guard their pawn on c4. Of course, we take the first opportunity to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain before pushing e6. And now we get this beautiful, let's say, reverse London pawn structure with Black. Knight h4, very typical move. Here comes the key question. Do you know one of the good moves here for Black? Of course, even bg6 is okay, but there's bishop e4. I made a video about this, folks. The move is bishop e4. I will post the link of that video here as well. What's the point? If you take my bishop, which is a mistake, you will recapture with the d pawn. Can you see the art of burying pieces, folks? That pawn is burying that knight on h4. That knight is completely shut down from the game, and Black is having an advantageous position all of a sudden. That's a beautiful Slav pattern and chunk you must also know. I will be describing you all of this in the actual course as well, folks. That's why the White player did not take on e4, but played f3 instead. But the drawback of f3, folks, is, you see, some kingside squares are getting weakened. Even the e3 pawn is slightly weakened, and even later, this diagonal will become weakened, basically. So after queen b3, queen b6, here, if White takes on b6, that only helps this rook on the a file. That's why White doesn't take on b6 either. They first exchange the knight for the bishop, and then, right, ask Black from taking that queen on b3, and here we are back to the first position. Should Black take on b3 or not? You know the answer already. That's the only move for Black that gives Black a small advantage. As I said, the queen starts eyeing here, preparing those breaks as well. King, bishop d2, knight d7. So far, so good. The White player usually goes castle long in those positions because the king side was already less safe, so to speak. And here, blunder check, please, folks. Can we take on h2 in this position? Can we take twice on h2? The answer is no, because this pawn is a loose pawn. It's attacked once, guarded only once by the queen. So if you go ahead and grab that pawn on h2, comes queen takes b7, folks. Attacking here, there, rook b8, queen takes c6, and this is a disastrous position for black. All these moves are coming. Bishop b5 is there also. One of those ideas. There is no counterplay. This game is totally over. So you cannot take on h2. Be aware. But in the actual game, can you guess black's move here, folks? Another beautiful Slav pattern for us. This is about reading the board properly. Look, the white king just castled on the queen side. What's your game plan? Your game plan is to open up lines on the queen side ultimately and start targeting the white king over here. So which pawn break are we playing for, folks? Yes, b6 is a very, very strong move here. Also the best move, you're basically destroying the pawn on c5, destroying the pawn center, the pawn chain, and you're forcing white literally to take on b6. But of course, you recapture with the a pawn and the rook gets happy. Not only that, you can also support ideas like b5, b4, and so on to start your storm on the queen side. Here, can you guess grandmaster's move? Very simple move, b5. As I said, the pawn storm is raging, also activating the queen on the a file and start putting pressure on the queen side structure. If you push c5, folks, the problem is b5 square is given to white, right? This will be premature to push c5. That's why he goes b5 in the actual game. King b1. b4 was also very good. He first plays the move bishop e7. Sometimes the king can even castle short. Flexible move. g4. White wants to create their own storm on the king side. Of course, right? That's also a very logical plan for white, of course. But here comes grandmaster's vision. He first goes b4. Why? Because our plan involves attacking the white king before white can attack our structure on the king side. Knight a4 is disallowed because of a very simple move, queen a7, and there is no way for that knight to move to a useful square. You're giving up at least a pawn in the structure, take, and the queen is also overworked on the pawn on a2. Black is completely winning in this position, folks. So b4, knight a4 is not possible. That's why he went knight e2 in the actual game. But then the grandmaster follows it up very logically with the move c5. He wants to activate the knight as well on d7, folks. Also here, very simple idea of c4 and c3 and so on and so on. The storm is raging on that side. So this is a must. Knight takes c5, attacks the queen. Can you see how we keep the king in the center? Because it's very safe. There is no check to calculate given this position. The queen is attacked. Queen takes b4, creates the alignment, and now grandmaster simply castles short and involves the final piece into the attack. You see, now it's a pure pawn storm position. Kings castled on opposite flanks, but black's attack is starting first. Black already stacked the b pawn to activate their pieces. It's as simple as that, folks. Can you see how it all connects? Earlier queen c7 move, b6 break, and so on. The game is already over. We will see how black finishes off this task. Queen a7 attacks the pawn on a2. Knight c1 was the game continuation. If they go a3, folks, comes a very simple move, knight a4 or rook b8. And now all these ideas are present. Direct idea is knight a4, followed by rook takes b2, and this game is already finished. There is no way for white to save their position, folks. For example, queen c2, you can even take on b2, follow it up with bishop takes a3. Can you see how every single piece is involved in the attack? That's why after queen a7, he plays the move knight a1, knight c1 to, let's say, defend the key point of a2. What's the drawback of that move? Well, after rook b8, the real threat becomes knight a4, folks. Now b2 is a clear target. It was such a big threat that white player played the move b4 in the actual game. Very committal, right? They are weakening their king even further, weakening the a4 square as well. And now, well, there are many winning moves here for black. In the actual game, the grandmaster played the move knight d7. That pawn is also pinned, by the way. He invites ideas like bishop f6 in his position as well. And the knight is also moving towards the queen side just in case. Every single black piece is targeting the queen side structure, and the white king is not safe at all. Knight a6. Again, there are many other winning moves. He plays very directly as well, attacking that pawn, forcing b5, attacking that pawn once again. White cannot play a4 because of this, and now that pawn is slowly dropping. You could even take on a b5 directly, but he plays the move queen a4 first, hitting at the pawn while also hitting the rook on d1, right? there is no defense, folks. He takes on b5. Very simple chess indeed. Very simple chess. And now comes rook takes b5. And then the final operation begins, hitting the queen. Follow it up with knight c5, hitting the pin knight as well. Very simple chess. He just plays without sacrifices. Attack without sacrificing. And here white player resigned, guys. Can you see it? Because now you simply crash through on that b3 square with all your pieces targeting that pin knight. The knight cannot move because of the queen and the king. And here black is completely winning. Again, folks, I want you to focus on that key decision. That's the first pattern we are talking about. If they take on e4, then you always capture back with the pawn to bury that knight on h4. That's why white players usually go f3 if they know what they are doing. And then comes the key moment. You first invite a trade on your own terms. If white asks you to take on b3, no. Right? There is no bishop on f4. The queen can safely go back to c7. You almost always do it in those positions, folks. And the queen is supporting all these beautiful ideas. If you take on b3, it only becomes a one-sided event from this position, because before b5 will follow very soon. As I said, a6 doesn't help anything because the pawn is already pinned, and now it becomes very difficult for black to play, right? For example, they can even take on c6 to create a long-term target. Not to mention they can even take on a6 in this position. There are immediate threats you are facing. Bishop b7, this is already over, by the way. So after take on b3, it's very unpleasant. As I said, if you play a6, comes b4, b5 anyway. You don't have time to move the knight, move the rook to unpin that pawn on a6. It's already a very unpleasant position indeed. I've been there myself. It's no fun defending those positions. Here, it's very difficult already to play for black, folks. Like, for example, g5, let's say to eye some g4 ideas. They can even like prepare the eventual b5 push. Now they can take on c6, follow it up with b5. You know what I mean? That pawn is pinned. They are putting maximum pressure on the queen side. They can even play b6 at some point. It's not fun. That's exactly why white invites you to take on b3 in this position. This pattern must be known by heart by London players, Slav players. That's huge, this kind of positional chess chunk. And now you play queen c7. You don't give anything. Also, look, after b6, the white queen is blocking the white pawn from pushing b4. Can you see the final point of queen c7, folks? This also strengthens your b6 idea because white is in no position to support their important pawn on c5. They need to waste more time with the queen if they want to prepare for that idea in this position, right? So bishop d2, very typical. That's the main line. Knight d7, castle long b6. It's already black who is better. It's also sort of practically easier to play for black in this position because step by step, you improve on the queen side. You can sometimes castle short, sometimes keep the king in the center. We are flexible in this position. As we even talked about, even this h4, h5 wasn't happening anytime soon on the king side. So sometimes even there are some middle games that your king is quite safe on the king side as well when you get the final piece into the queen side action. The structure is so undesirable for black is that many masters never even choose to go here with black. I only found one master game from this pawn structure, which is in white's favor. So I'll just show you very quickly this game to highlight my point. It's so easy to play with white in those positions, folks, right? Like two masters, international masters playing against each other before b5 is coming. They can even gain further space on the king side. And it's white who is now holding all kind of pawn breaks, b4, b5, and then b4, b5 again, maybe sometimes e4 in those positions. Black cannot do anything against those ideas, folks. Can you see it? b4, b5 is coming. That rook became active, every single white piece. White also has the bishop pair. That's a long-term advantage. And you're lacking any kind of explosive pawn break to activate your pieces in this position, folks. Just to show you again, once again, white already is a huge advantage in this position. Now they got themselves a protected passed pawn on c5 too. Now after knight b8, they want to blockade on c6. Comes the final point because that knight no longer puts pressure on the pawn on d4. Thus, white can play the final pawn break e4 to activate this guy as well. Press the pawn on d5. After takes, look at white's pawn center, folks. Now e5 followed by knight e4s are coming. It's so unpleasant to play for black. The bishop is terrible. That knight is tied down. Knight e4 to d6 are coming. That rook defense here. White already has a big advantage in his position, and they went on to win this game very easily from this position. So the course will be idea-based. I will be showing you those typical important positional patterns that happen over and over again in the Slav defense, and I will describe to you the plans around those ideas too, right? This will connect to the ensuing pawn breaks for black as well. I will give you all the middle game plans and different ways to play those structures, and sense of danger will also improve. You will have certain chunks in your memories. For example, you say, hey, as long as there's no bishop on f4 on this diagonal, it's always a good thing for me to refuse the trade on white's own terms and play move like queen c7. The queen is very safe, and now I'm preparing my pawn breaks with good play in the middle game. Once again, notice how the grandmaster, once he refused the queen trade, he looked at the white king position and played the move b6. And notice white is in no position to play b4 anyway, and the queen is even blocking that pawn in its position. So it's a beautiful timing for this pawn break. Why? Because you want to open up lines. You want to storm the queen side with black in this position. I'll be showing you those ideas as well in this course. There'll be so much middle game training on top of move by move memorization, move by move training of the whole repertoire against one d4. I'll be giving you d4, d5 openings based on the Slav defense with all these important middle game chunks and ideas involved. And as I discover those beautiful chunks and positions, I'll be making videos like this to help you improve your middle game as well, folks. If you like this video, folks, please give me a like and subscribe so I can keep on producing content that actually helps you get better this